weather. We're going to turn this camera around because we are talking today about something that has probably been affecting you at least for the last month or so, and that is pollen. And those of you who are not from Georgia or who recently moved to Georgia within the past couple years or whenever it is, I'm sure the first thing that you noticed is the pollen here is crazy. And so we're going to talk about the pollen in Georgia, when we see the certain types of pollen, why it's so high, what we see on what months, and what we use. Let me turn my mic down because I tend to scream and I think I'm screaming. There we go. And what we can do weather-wise, or at least what kind of weather helps bring those pollen levels down. So there are things that help with pollen. There are things that make pollen worse. So we're going to be talking about all of that in today's World of Weather lesson. First of all, I want to talk about what we're seeing right now, and this is springtime pollen, and this is tree pollen. So depending on the time of year, that's what type of pollen we have and what impacts us. In the springtime, it's tree pollen. That's going to be the one that impacts you, especially if you're allergic to tree pollen, to birch, to oak, to pine. Those are some of the big offenders here in Georgia. It starts, or at least the pollen season starts in mid-March and continues through April, and then starts to taper off in May. So as we head into May, you'll notice those tree pollen levels start to come down. Now, when you look outside, and we're going to talk about this a little bit once we start our slides, but that yellow gunk you see everywhere, it's disgusting. It's on cars. It's on your deck. I feel like I'll put a tablecloth. We have a table outside. I'll put a tablecloth down and I'll wait 20 minutes and I come back and it's just covered in pollen. That is pine pollen. And although that's one of the biggest pollens, that's the one you visually see the most, that's actually not the one that's most likely causing you problems. Those pollen seeds or those pollens are much bigger than other types of pollen. So those usually aren't the ones that cause allergies, but certainly that's the one you see the most of. So once we end with the springtime pollen, which is tree pollen, then we start turning into grass pollen. Grass pollen starts to pick up in May, continues through the summer, and depending on your body and what you're allergic to, that determines how you react to the different seasons and to the different levels of pollen. For example, personally, I'm allergic to grass pollen. Grass pollen for me is the worst of all the pollen. So although you're going to look at the maps, you're going to look at the calendars, and you'll see that in April, in March, the grass pollen numbers are way higher than the grass pollen numbers that we'll see in the summer. But because I'm more allergic to grass pollen, I'm going to be feeling much, much worse in the summer as opposed to the spring. So all of this is deeply personal, very personal. Depending on what you're allergic to, that's where you're going to feel the biggest side effects. But certainly when you have thousands and thousands and thousands of pollen particles out there, that's going to affect you more than when we have less pollen out there in the air. So we talked about spring, which is right now, that's tree pollen. Then we have grass pollen. Then in late August, we have weed pollen. So weed is a big offender for us as well. That starts in August, and that continues until about the first or second freeze. So usually that continues till about October or November. Once you get that freeze, it kills the weed pollen, and you don't have it any longer. Does anyone know what the biggest weed pollen is in Georgia? Does anybody know? It's probably the one you've heard the most of. It's ragweed. Ragweed. You'll see it growing on the sides of the interstates and some of the roads. So ragweed is the biggest offender here in North Georgia for weed pollen. And again, weed pollen, that happens in late August and continues until the first or second freeze. Now, weather-wise, there are certain things that make pollen better, and there are certain things that make pollen worse. When you look at what makes pollen better, and when I mean better, I mean what brings those pollen levels down. What do we look at as a meteorologist when we're doing our forecast to say the pollen's going to be better tomorrow instead of worse? Or on the other side, what's going to make it worse? And that is rain. Rain is really huge when it comes to forecasting pollen. When you have a string of warm, dry days, the pollen levels will really rise. And especially this time of year, they rise very, very quickly. On the other hand, when you have rain in the forecast, especially widespread rain and a good soaking rain, that almost clears the pollen away completely. So the rain really a huge factor. Winds are a big factor as well. On a windier day, that pollen is flying through the air a lot more, so you may feel the effects of the pollen a lot more. Also, the time of day is a factor. Pollen levels are pretty high in the morning, but they actually peak in the mid-afternoon. So around 2, 3, 4, that's when pollen levels are at their highest. So if you are an allergy sufferer, you probably know these things just by Mother Nature telling you that you probably don't feel so hot around 3 in the afternoon if you're outside on a warm, dry day, because those pollen levels are high. Now, we talked about the peak of the tree pollen season being right now, starts in mid-March, continues through April, ends in May. I want to show you the calendar. This comes out from the Atlanta Allergy and Asthma Center. They're kind of our local go-to. They're the ones that do the pollen count each and every day for Atlanta, for North Georgia, and they put it out in a calendar. So I want to show you the calendar of April. So red is extreme, orange is high. And as you can see, every single day so far this month, the pollen has been either high or extreme. And that's very typical for April. Now we're going to go to March. So this is March. Let me move this screen down. And remember, we talked about the tree pollen season peaks in mid-March. So in mid-March, that's when it peaks. So starting here, you can see it started right around the 5th, 13th, 16th. We really started to see those pollen levels go up. So that's very normal to see that happen in mid-March. Exactly where we should be. Other weather factors that influence the pollen can be the winter. For example, if we had a really mild winter, then we tend to see the pollen season start a little sooner. Also, it means we could see it extend longer in the season. So lots of things we watch for the pollen season. So we are going to go to our graphics here. Let me open this up, and we're going to talk about pollen for Georgia. Let me move my keyboard over a bit. We're going to scoot you on in so you can see exactly what we're talking about in today's lesson, the world of weather, talking about pollen today. So today's pollen count comes out every morning in Georgia. And of course, we talked about it. It's the tree pollen is 3,102. So it is extreme. And as I showed you on the map for March and April, the pollen count has been extreme or high for the entire month of April. So this is very normal. April is definitely the peak of our tree pollen, and mulberry, oak, those are all very common pollen types we see. And we talked about the 4 different types of pollen. We have tree pollen, which is what affects us in the spring. Then we have grass pollen that affects us in the summer months. Then we have weed pollen that affects us in the late summer and into the fall. And then we have mold pollen as well. And certainly all of these will cause you to sneeze, itchy eyes, make you feel pretty miserable. And it really depends on what you are allergic to. Again, I'm allergic to grass pollen. The tree pollen does impact me, but not as much as the grass pollen does. So I'm actually going to feel worse in the summer, even though technically those pollen levels are lower in the summer. So everyone says, why is it so bad in Georgia? Well, Georgia is a city, or at least Atlanta, city in a forest. We have lots of trees and plants, and we have all 4 seasons, and we have them. I mean, we see snow. We don't get a lot, but we have snow, we have ice, we have summer, we have 95, 100-degree days in the summer. We have all 4 seasons. And so that's why we get so much pollen year round, because we do get all of those seasons across 12 months out of the year. You look at somewhere like Florida, they're hot all the time. They don't have the freezes happening. They don't have everything dying off in the winter months. So they're not getting as much pollen as we are seeing here in Georgia. So it's our climate that really helps produce this pollen year round. Pollen season, a big thing we're seeing now is that yellow gunk. That is the nasty yellow, yucky. It's all over your car. It's on your deck. It's on your tables outside. It's on your mailbox. And you can even see it floating around. And that's actually pine pollen. So a pine tree, you know what a pine tree, those are the tall trees that sway easily in the wind. They're really, really tall. Pine pollen is what brings us all that yellow stuff. But other types of pollen are out there, even though they're not necessarily leaving that thick yellow film. Pine pollen doesn't cause allergies, at least not as much as some of the other pollens out there. They're just too big. And this is what it looks like under a microscope, because every day the Atlanta Allergy and Asthma Center, they actually measure the pollen count. They look under microscopes and they're able to tell the different pollens apart. And if you look at pine pollen, it looks like Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse under a microscope. So that's how they know what kind of pollen they're looking at. They actually look under a microscope. And that brings us to today's trivia question of the day for April 8th. And that is, what is the yellow pollen that is all over cars on the outside? And we just talked about it. Hopefully you were paying attention. And it is pine pollen. Is the type of pollen that is outside in the spring months that causes everything to be yellow and yucky. And everyone always asks me, when is it safe to wash my car? This is for your moms and dads. When is it safe to but it starts to go down in May. So usually by May, mid-May, that's when it's safe to kind of wash away some of that yellow stuff without worried about it coming back. I mean, I notice my camera keeps going in and out, so I apologize for that. So I'm looking now on our feed to see what kind of questions. Kevin, thank you so much. Bob, mold is rising. That is true, Bob. Mold is rising as well. We need more rain. We absolutely need more rain. I'm going to see what kind of questions. If you have any questions, please let me know. Hi, Stockbridge. Hi, Jennifer. Let's see. Hi. I'm looking at everyone. How long can pollen be? So I'm guessing that means how long will it be with us? And it depends on the type of pollen. Yeah, so it depends on the type of pollen. The one we're seeing now, which is tree pollen, continues through mid-May. Then at the end of May, we have grass pollen, and that continues through the summer. So it really depends on what type of pollen you're looking at. The grass pollen and the weed pollen isn't as visible as the tree pollen. So we see the tree pollen more, but we do get high levels of grass pollen and weed pollen as well. Just because it's not as visual doesn't mean it's there. And if you have allergies, you know that because you can feel it. Let's see, I think that's everything. Hi, everybody. I'm just getting a lot of highs. Hi, everyone. I appreciate the love. And I'll tell you that I'm getting a lot of messages from teachers who are actually using these as part of their lesson plans. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That makes me so happy, so excited to see that. And actually, recently, I've been getting a lot of emails from adults, too, who don't even have kids, and they're watching World of Weather because they said they never want to stop learning, and they love learning about this stuff because it's things they've always wondered about, and now they have the opportunity to learn about it. So I'm so happy for that as well. A lot of work goes into these, and I know we don't have the fancy, technology to do it because I'm doing it from home. I'm a one-man band here, so it's not going to look as fancy, but I hope at least it's a good avenue for getting the information across and that you're still getting everything you want and want to learn about all of these. So I think that's it for today. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll go back later and answer them. Today, we do have a risk of severe weather this afternoon. Very low risk, mainly in West Georgia after about 4 or 5 p.m., mainly south of I-20. Could see some strong damaging winds and heavy rain. Also tomorrow morning, we have a bigger risk of severe weather early in the morning, starting around 4 a.m., continuing until about 8 a.m. So we're watching that closely as well. So I'm actually leaving my home. I'm going into the studio at CBS 46. So you'll see me live at the station starting at 4 p.m. Make sure you join us for the latest on that. And of course, we'll keep you covered through tomorrow morning as well. The weather world is always changing. We're always here for you. Everyone, thank you for joining me for today's World of Weather. I hope you learned a lot about the pollen. Keep on taking that allergy medicine, especially if you're allergic to tree pollen. It doesn't get better until May. Everyone, we'll see you tomorrow at 1:15. Have a great day.